The deployment of soldiers in Ukraine has long been a contentious matter. With Russia's military becoming more assertive, this delicate topic has been brought back to the forefront. Putin's repeated use of the nuclear trump card, as well as his frontline collaboration with North Korea, has prompted NATO to tighten its security measures. Putin was shrewd enough to threaten NATO with nuclear weapons, bold enough to collaborate with North Korea, and fearful enough to recognize that his military would be rendered worthless against a combined NATO force. However, the breaching of Putin's red lines has demonstrated that his warnings have not materialized. NATO encountered this revelation when it lifted limits on Storm Shadow and ATAC-M's missiles. Furthermore, Russia's collaboration with North Korea created fresh opportunities for NATO. Despite being stationed on Russian territory, North Korean forces fought on the front lines against Ukraine. If Russia can get military assistance to protect its land, wouldn't it be reasonable for Ukraine to do the same? This revived the possibility of sending a united NATO force to Ukraine to resolve the conflict. Sending soldiers to Ukraine has long been one of the UK and France's peace alternatives. The United Kingdom and France now had cause to conclude that North Korea and Russia's collaboration had reached an end. Following the Storm Shadow and ATAC-M's actions, the UK and France have stepped up their attempts to send soldiers or staff to Ukraine. But would Russia's ongoing conflict with North Korea against Ukraine prompt NATO allies France and the United Kingdom to send soldiers to Kiev? What type of difficulty would Putin confront if the two NATO nations contribute soldiers to the war? What type of deterrent measures will the United Kingdom and France, as well as the United States and other alliance members, employ to halt the conflict in Ukraine? We will now look at all of these questions. The British and French administrations have allegedly resumed talks about deploying Western soldiers to safeguard Ukraine from future Russian aggression. Andrei Kellen, Russia's ambassador to the United Kingdom, provided crucial views on whether it would be appropriate to deploy UK forces in Ukraine, alluding to the decision to loosen limits on the employment of Storm Shadow missiles. French President Emmanuel Macron has been one of the most vocal backers of deploying soldiers to Ukraine. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot stated that they are not ruling out any options. The French armed forces, particularly among the military, have grown increasingly confident in the role that their people may play in Ukraine, particularly since the cessation of hostilities. The United Kingdom and France's intentions to send soldiers to Ukraine alarmed the Kremlin. The Kremlin leadership described such a move as feverish. However, the incoming U.S. President Donald Trump has also expressed support for this action. Donald Trump has vowed to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine, and the details of his plan are starting to surface. The U.S. president most likely evaluated Russia's military collaboration with North Korea and thought it was inappropriate that tens of thousands of North Korean troops, whom Pyongyang had placed at Putin's disposal, were fighting in Kursk and on other fronts. The United Kingdom and France both opposed North Korean forces fighting for Russia against Ukraine. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been a prominent proponent of the concept of the UK and France sending soldiers to Ukraine in recent days. Boris Johnson stated that British troops should be sent to secure Ukraine's borders in the case of a future truce with Russia. The previous Prime Minister highlighted that European peacekeepers should bear the duty of keeping any accord intact. Boris Johnson went on to say that Western countries must prevent Russia from rearming and launching another attack on Ukraine in the future by outlining what security assurances would be provided. Johnson's plan is likely to ensure that NATO's Article 5, which specifies that an assault on one member is deemed an attack on all members, be invoked if Western troops serving in a UN peacekeeping mission are attacked. As a result, the former Prime Minister has urged Ukraine to join NATO as soon as possible, stating that it is the only long-term option. According to analysts, the NATO troops Boris Johnson is talking to will not necessarily enter Ukraine to forcefully combat Russian forces. These extra NATO forces might form a security bubble around a large portion of Ukraine that is not seized by Russia. According to commentators, this would considerably increase Ukraine's prospects of ending the war on its own terms, and such a presence is undoubtedly required for post-conflict stabilization. The only way to persuade Russian President Vladimir Putin that Ukraine's sovereignty and independence are no longer vulnerable to his revisionist imperial goals is through a real security guarantee, such as a military presence on the ground. While a NATO deployment to Ukraine and NATO membership would have the most impact, a robust transatlantic coalition of the willing would suffice and may aid with the former. Europe could offer the majority of such an army. However, many think that Putin will not be persuaded until the United States participates by supplying the essential enabling capabilities, like as intelligence, air cover, air defense, and long-range attacks. But how does the United States feel about this? The new U.S. government, led by Donald Trump, is determined to resolving the war in Ukraine. Brian Lanza, Trump's political advisor during his 2016 presidential campaign, has claimed that the next U.S. government will prioritize peace in Ukraine above assisting Russia in regaining land taken during the almost three-year war. Following this declaration, Trump's team discussed putting the conflict on hold, not challenging Russia's capture of about 20% of Ukraine, and forcing Ukraine to temporarily halt its bid to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. A previously unreported proposal in Trump's transition office, disclosed by three people close to the president-elect, would have Kiev pledge not to join NATO for at least 20 years. In exchange, it was anticipated that the U.S. would continue to supply Ukraine with armaments to deter a future Russian strike aimed at disrupting the ceasefire. This idea would basically shut down the front lines, with both sides agreeing to an 800-mile demilitarized zone. It is unclear who would manage this zone, but a Trump advisor stated that the peacekeeping force would not involve American troops or come from a U.S.-funded international body like the United Nations. Trump's advisor highlighted that the Poles, Germans, British, and French should safeguard the demilitarized zone. This is where British and French forces, in particular, would step in. In some aspects, this idea mirrored remarks made by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance during an interview in September. Vance proposed that a final agreement to end the war include a highly fortified, demilitarized zone to prevent Russian forces from entering Ukraine again. Vance also stated that Russia would keep the lands it had taken while maintaining Ukraine's neutrality. The fact that the Trump administration was pursuing a similar strategy heightened the prospect that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine might finish with Moscow controlling Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. So, what does Russia intend to do to stop the war? Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of the Russian Security Council, stated that the West should accept Russia's victory in Ukraine and negotiate an end to the conflict. Shoigu, Putin's friend and defense minister from 2012 until his dismissal in May, similarly stated that the West attempted to exploit Ukraine to inflict a geopolitical loss on Russia, but failed. According to Shoigu, Ukraine must abandon its NATO ambitions and evacuate its soldiers from the 4 territories claimed by Moscow. Shoigu, who is still one of Putin's closest advisors, is unlikely to have his views recognized by the Ukrainian administration. In reality, this is exactly what Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin wanted. Putin desired that Russia continue to occupy a portion of Ukraine and take control of Crimea. However, the demands of the Russian leadership compelled the NATO alliance to take stronger measures. Germany, for example, just took a significant step against Russia's requests to terminate the conflict. As Russia's nuclear saber-rattling escalates, the Berlin administration has disclosed that it has began planning how to assist in the deployment of around 800,000 NATO troops, including Americans, to Ukraine. The strategy, dubbed Operation Deutschland, spans 1,000 pages. According to German media sources, top-secret documents outlining the strategy outline particular buildings and infrastructure that must be preserved so that the military may utilize them, as well as how companies and people can prepare in the event of heightened threats. According to the papers, Berlin is ready to send 200,000 military vehicles into German land in case the alliance needs to help Ukraine's operations. In the operational plan, Germany also instructs residents on how to prepare for the worst by boosting their self-sufficiency through methods such as constructing diesel generators and wind turbines. This amendment appears to specifically target NATO nations that have armed Ukraine in the present battle. Russia's former nuclear doctrine, on the other hand, stated that nuclear weapons may be deployed if there was evidence of an approaching ballistic missile strike. However, the revised version broadens the scope of incoming assaults that may justify nuclear use to include airstrikes against planes, missiles, and drones. This appears to be a direct response to the current conflict in Ukraine, as well as an attempt to increase the dangers for NATO countries that support Ukraine. The most crucial conclusion from these revisions in Russian doctrine is that they target NATO in the context of Ukraine, indicating that Russia's conditions for using nuclear weapons are widening and that it is more likely to escalate the existing conflict. In summary, Russia's intimidating pressure environment and nuclear games spark the concept of NATO sending troops to Ukraine, paving the door for immediate action by the United Kingdom and France. At the same time, Russia's conduct has reignited the debate about Ukraine's NATO membership. We will learn more about NATO's reactions, security measures, and whether or not it will send soldiers to Ukraine. However, if Russia continues to threaten nuclear weapons and engage in hazardous collaboration with North Korea, NATO is likely to take even more dramatic action in the future to send soldiers to Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in.